negotiation can be over before it even gets started. Let's pretend that I'm an entrepreneur raising capital from 3 different funds operating under 3 different cultural norms. Camille, thanks so much for your time today in Shanghai. In China and Japan, it's customary to make a 2-handed business card exchange. Frank, really appreciate the time today in Mumbai. In India, it's customary to make a right-handed only exchange, and you should have your university or college prominently displayed on the card, as education is so highly regarded. Ellen, thanks so much for your time today in San Francisco. Instead of giving you a business card, I've decided to conserve paper, and I'll be texting you my contact information. You're cool with that, right?
Yes.
While this is a slight exaggeration, many firms in the US are shifting away from the traditional business card exchange practice. Nonetheless, at this point in the meeting, a small blunder can have a negative ripple effect throughout the rest of the negotiation. Grace, Deepa, Felix, and I are going to explore the strategies in cross-cultural negotiations. While we're all pretty familiar with the concepts of IQ and EQ, what about CQ, cultural intelligence? CQ can be understanding when to dress more formally for a presentation and when to wear a hoodie. But it encompasses so much more than that. Pre-negotiation formalities such as handshakes, the exchange of business cards, and simple greetings can be culturally independent, and the most compelling argument in a negotiation may become null and void if you've lacked the awareness up front. The keys to navigating these negotiations are pretty consistent across cultures. A strong argument, a willingness to capitulate on certain aspects, and desire to reach a conclusion. And while finding an outcome and cultural differences are not mutually exclusive, having the awareness and preparedness will ultimately put you in a better position to succeed. There also exists a there versus here fallacy. People wrongfully assume I have no plans of raising money or doing business in Russia anytime soon. But what happens when a Russia investor comes to you? What happens when the there comes here? Cultural context is independent of geography, and it's very important to be aware of that. Our goal today is to provide you with 3 basic tactics and strategies that will give you the confidence to help navigate through these cross-cultural negotiations. I'm now going to pass off to Deepa, who will talk about the nuances of disagreement.
Thank you, Matt. Disagreement is inevitable in any negotiation. Let's take a quick peek at a short video.
Sorry? He's wired in.
Is he?
Yes.
How about now? You still wired in?
Full security.
You issued 24 million new shares of stock.
You were told that if new investors
How
came
much
along...
were your shares diluted? How much were his?
Lots of emotion, right? This could happen to any of us. And what makes this more complicated in a cross-cultural context is the fact that the way disagreements are expressed varies significantly from one culture to another. Researchers say that there are 2 essential characteristics of how disagreements are expressed. One is how confrontation is expressed, and the second is how emotions are expressed. So for example, if you're in a negotiation with your Russian counterpart, there's a strong likelihood that he or she will disagree with pretty much every single thing you say. Because from their perspective, that is an open invitation to have an animated and lively discussion. On the other hand, if you're in a negotiation with a Mexican counterpart, you may want to soften the disagreement so that you don't run the risk of completely shutting down the conversation. So if you have any plans of co-organizing a trip to Oaxaca with Jaime, and you're negotiating the terms and the itinerary, you may want to approach it along the lines of, Jaime, I'm not sure I quite understand this, or could you explain this a little bit more? Researchers also say that negotiators have an assumption, which is a fallacy, that emotional expressiveness goes hand in hand with confrontation. And that's not always the case. Your German counterpart may be very open to confrontation, but only so long as it's expressed calmly and factually. On the other hand, your Indian counterpart may be polite and soft when it comes to confrontation, but will wear their emotions on their sleeve. So now that we're aware of these different cultural nuances and contexts, how can we be prepared for a cross-cultural negotiation? Linguistic experts say that the key is to analyze verbal cues. And they specifically highlight two types of cues, what they call upgraders and downgraders. Upgraders are words like absolutely and completely that help you strengthen the disagreement, whereas downgraders are words like maybe, just a little bit, that help you soften the disagreement. So the key really is to make sure that you analyze and understand these verbal cues within their cultural context so that you're able to adapt your reaction and your response accordingly. That will help you be more successful and more effective in establishing that early connection with your negotiator. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Grace, who's going to walk us through the implication of the words yes and no in cross-culture.
Do you want to watch another video? Yes? No?
Am I right in thinking there is nobody else in this house?
No.
Then there is someone else in this house.
No, sorry. I said no meaning yes.
No meaning yes?
In the United Kingdom, where I grew up, yes means yes, and no means no. So this is where things get confusing for me. In some countries, such as Egypt, yes actually means no, or maybe, or I'll think about it, or I really want to do what you want, but it's absolutely not possible, and I hope you can tell that by my body language. A verbal yes might be seen as more polite or pleasing, and there's no expectation that yes is binding. In parallel, there are some cultures where no might actually mean yes, or let's discuss this further. Wait, let's say you're doing a negotiation with a French person, let's say Claire, and she responds to a question with no. She might actually mean yes. She just wants to debate it a bit further. So, if yes means no, and no means yes, don't ask yes or no questions. Instead of saying, can you do this for me? Say, by when will you be able to do this for me? And if you just have to ask that yes or no question, make sure to analyze tone and body language. For example, yes is very different than yes. Now that we've discussed the difficulties of yes and no questions, I'm going to hand it over to Felix, who's going to discuss problems with putting things in writing.
Thank you, Grace. So Deepa and Grace immerse you into the challenges of what a negotiation has in terms of oral communication. But what about what we put in writing and whether we have to put it into writing?
You know I don't do contracts, but what you do have is my word. And it's stronger than oak.
So in the countries on the left-hand side of the screen, especially in Africa and Asia, a word is stronger than oak. But in other countries, the one you have on the right-hand side of the screen, we like to put things into writing. So let's take the US, for instance. Guys, here in the US, you like clarity and repetition as a way to make sure that the other party understands what you were negotiating about. So Tomas, if you go back to Guatemala, that I'm sure you will be doing that, and you lead the procurement division at your family business, don't be surprised when you negotiate with your American suppliers and they send you an email with a list of things you have agreed on, and even ask you to reply back to them by saying, yes, I agree with that. They do that, and you guys do that, and we do it in Western cultures because we want to protect ourselves against potential eventualities, and because we want to build trust with a counterpart that we don't necessarily know. As opposed to that, in Africa, in countries like Nigeria, and for those of you who want to go into Africa and work there, business people will take an email or a contract as a sign of disrespect and also as a sign of lack of trust. They want you to be flexible. Be flexible around two things. First, to take a contract, an oral contract, as a right contract. And secondly, to take an oral contract as something that is flexible and can change over time because circumstances change. So the third piece of advice for you on how we want you to be prepared is actually to ask your counterpart to prepare the first draft of the contract so that they feel more comfortable with it. And remember one thing, in some countries around the world, a contract is not binding at all. So by now, you're probably a little bit overwhelmed by all the advice, the countries, the references, the friends that we have from France, from different countries. We want you to remember 4 things. The first one is you have to analyze the verbal cues and adapt your reaction to the emotion you are perceiving from the other party. Second thing is avoid yes and no questions, as Craig said. And third thing is please ask the other party to write the first draft of the contract if you have to do so that they feel more comfortable with it. But if we want you to remember something, it's the APS framework. Be aware of the differences, be prepared for those differences so that you can be more successful next time you are negotiating in a different culture. Thank you very much, and now we'll be happy to take any questions you may have.